correspondent. So let me just try and do the first thing, which is to put this on screen. What have we got, Parisa? Can you see that?
Perfect. Yes. Yeah. If you could just
full screen.
Make that full screen. Perfect.
Well, thank you for the chance. I really appreciate it because there's a lot happening, and I wanted to be able to get a chance to talk about it. And the context is a very scary one as we are leaving the safe operating space of 1 degree centigrade band that we've built our cities and agriculture on for the last 8,000 years. And we're leaving that, going into unknown territory, and we are hoping to create a new economy where we can come back into that band. So the politics is that there has been a green slam, an extraordinary event when you think the Cheney family became less liberal and more climate oriented, and all of those amazing teals all saying that we needed to do more on climate change. And at the same time, a big swing again to Labor in this state and somewhat less in other parts of Australia. But this one was very important to me. Sam Lim winning Tangney, totally unexpected, a 14% swing or something amazing, because Ben Morton was the one who ran the Perth Freight Link, and that whole issue has dogged us in this part of the world for some time. It was a Tony Abbott road that was planned through the middle of wetlands and through Fremantle. It goes back a long way. It was always a silly road, and there was a massive public reaction. We wrote a book about it, and the McGowan government was elected on with an 18% swing, and their first announcement was to stop it, but it's now totally off the agenda. And the money instead has gone into Metronet with metro hubs, which is actually what we need to talk about today. The idea of how the urban regeneration of our city and other cities needs to proceed and accelerate. The global politics associated with this is both from IPCC and Putin. When our report, which came out April 4th, I think it was, I've been working on that for 3 years and 10 years before on other IPCC reports. The UN Director General was very angry when it came out. We're on a fast track to climate disaster, and all these laggards he was carrying on. He really and he named Australia at one point. Part of it, because that isn't all there was to it. There is a lot more hope in this document. But the context of making that announcement on that day was that the Ukraine war had begun, a massive increase in the price of coal, oil and natural gas. And so fossil fuel companies were suddenly reasserting themselves, saying, oh, we can't deal with climate change now, we've got to deal with this new market. And in that week, 6th of April, Woodside announced they'd got their $16 billion approval for the Scarborough project, which is 8 times the size of Adani in terms of greenhouse gases. So you can see why he was angry and why we need to deal with this issue as well now. There's going to be quite a bit more on that. But the bad news that was in our report was that greenhouse gas emissions globally continue to rise. And we're dealing with transport and buildings down the bottom there, but they were still going up. But there was hope because, as you can see on this rather interesting table, it's quite a long table, I won't show you all of it, but the rate of global emissions growth has slowed in recent years, and under that, 24 countries have reduced absolute CO2 and GHG emissions for at least 10 years, including consumption-based CO2. So there's always the other side of that, it's not enough, but it's underway, and we now need to accelerate, is the main mission. And the good news was shown in this report. It showed the dramatic drop in the cost of photovoltaics, onshore wind, offshore wind, concentrating solar power, and batteries and electric vehicles. So underneath, you see the exponential growth that's happening in the last decade or two, and mostly in the last decade. And in many ways, we didn't see it coming quite so fast. Because this is what's happened. The cost of solar has plummeted. It is now the cheapest form of power of any source of energy in history. You see solar is down the bottom there, coal in the middle, gas up the top. It is the most expensive way to do it. Second is nuclear. So you don't go that way now. Solar is winning. We have a few issues about solar. How much distributed energy, how much in solar farms, but there's no doubt that is the future. And it's not just IPCC saying this. The new economy is happening because of finance as much as anything. $170 trillion is only available to projects that are net zero. So net zero is on the agenda because of 170 trillion reasons. If you look at Climate Action 100 Plus, you'll see this website with all of that listed and all the groups. But I love this picture because we've been slowly going down this river and it's been getting faster and faster, and we're now going over and down into an uncharted territory. It's a very exciting drop. It could be disastrous, but we're going over it. We are accelerating like nothing else we've seen. So the acceleration's underway, and we have to think about what the built environment's going to mean. Now, you might have seen this from me before, but there's been waves of innovation. The history of this is very clear. Schumpeter called it a creative destruction. So we are destruction of the old economy. It is a major change, but it's a creative change, and we have to deal with that. And cities are very important to it because at each wave you have different energy sources, and at each wave different cities, because the transport systems are different. So it's not just about getting different energy sources. We also need different cities. So the innovations that are ready to go, they are commercial. You can go down to Bunnings and get most of them. Renewables, especially solar and wind, lithium-ion batteries, electric vehicles of all kinds, and smart city integration. These things fit together as a cluster, and they're cheaper and better than ever for our cities. Cities are ready to change with these technologies, but we've got to put them together, and they're different packages for different places. The integrating systems are beginning to be understood. Things like artificial intelligence and blockchain, all kinds of sensors. It's like an ecosystem of support that will need to pull all these variable forms of energy together, and all the storage and systems. There are innovations that are not quite ready. Hydrogen is not quite ready. It is going to be needed for industrial processing. Circular economy things are still fairly marginal. Advanced biofuels and synthetic hydrocarbons are certainly needing a lot of work, a lot of demonstrations, a lot of R&D. And there are technologies that are appearing in construction, carbon absorbing cement, different kinds of plastics, prefab, low carbon housing. All of that is well known to architects. There's even carbon negative landscaping you can do, and carbon negative industrial products of all kinds. So these things are going to inform our approach to the built environment. But the big things are solar, batteries, electric vehicles. So what can the built environment do now to make a difference? And it has to be a difference by 2030. That's what the whole election was about. It isn't enough to say, oh yeah, we'll get there by 2050. 2030, and the key thing from Labor was they had a serious policy to get there 43% by then. The Greens and the Teals are saying go further. This is what I'm suggesting we need to think about for the built environment. And this is our theory of urban fabrics, that there's 3 or 4 different types of cities within each city. You've got the dense walking city in the middle, the ancient city that goes back 8,000 years in some places, but it's present in most cities. That's surrounded by transit urban fabric based on trams and trains, goes along corridors, and each of those corridors tend to be medium density. And then around it, low density car-based urban fabric, which we've built mostly in the last wave of innovation, which was about fossil fuels. And the semi-rural area around that peri-urban fabric is very scattered. So you've got each of them, and each of them have a different greenhouse gas potential. The walking city, clearly the least. We've done a lot of data on these sort of things, and you can see that if we get more walking city, more transit city, then you will save considerably on greenhouse gases. I've written this paper, COVID Cities and Climate in Urban Science, and we look at central areas, inner, middle, outer, rural and remote settlement patterns under each of the technologies that are around, and it's different. That's the main thing to see in this. You have different strategies that are needed to make clusters of these technologies in different places, and each of them are important. For example, the central city, it's hard to do solar, so you've got all kinds of amazing people coming out with these solar windows, and the buildings on the left are all trialing it out now, so covered in solar cells up and down the whole of the skyscraper. And even the one on the right there is designed to rotate to be in the sun the whole time, and it's not yet built, of course. There's of course all the solar arrays on rooftops that are scattered around cities, but it's less able to take a lot of solar in the central city at the moment. And there are other technologies coming. There's a new one where you can go down with a kind of lift well that continues into the ground, and you lift a weight up and drop it down this big hole, and it turns potential energy into electricity. So it's gravitricity, they call it. Well, that's not happened yet either, but we're going to have these sort of things coming. But the other thing about this is the greenery that we need, and the biophilic urbanism has been a big part of what we've been preaching at Curtin and doing lots of work on. Not much yet in Perth. We do plant a lot of trees. That's Subiaco, which is one of the densest parts of Perth, on the right, but Singapore on the left has done so much with their high density buildings. But the driving force in the central city will continue to make it grow because it's walkability based. That's the area where knowledge economy jobs are. The top 6 most walkable cities in the US have 38% higher GDP. 70% of knowledge economy workers in Boston live in walkable streets. So we will be rebuilding centres, maybe more suburban centres now, not just the city centre, but the city centre will grow. And we've written a book about Jan Gehl. He's the great walkability guru, and his ideas have never been more relevant. The biophilic urbanism you can see on a film, Singapore Biophilic City. Now, the other extreme is that we are building things like Witchcliffe Eco Village, which is down near Margaret River, 400 people 400 houses, I think, and it's fully solar, batteries, electric vehicles integrated, and permaculture built into it as well. So what you've got are experiments now showing how to do it. That's the peri-urban fabric. So in between that, you've got the suburbs. So what do we do about the suburbs? This is interesting because it's a picture of the way the city of Canning sees the future of Cecil Avenue. Now, Cecil Avenue does not look like that. And most governments, local governments, are going for this kind of thing. They all want to be like the inner city. That's the market. That's how you get jobs there. And mid-tier transit makes this possible. So we've got an agenda now for mid-tier transit that cannot be neglected. And the mid-tier transit project we've been working on for nearly a decade, and we've discovered these trackless trams. We've got a free book on it, which you can see on the Sustainable Built Environment National Research Centre website. And this is electric. It's very clever. It's got lots of smart systems in it, and it is solving a range of problems apart from being part of the solution to greenhouse gas climate issues. So it's a matter of imagining the possibilities in these areas. It's possible to go into more inner city locations in the suburbs which were built other than that. There's a range of net zero projects happening in Perth, and they all have a microgrid with a connection to the main grid. The Shenton Village by Hesperia, the Roe Industrial Park by Hesperia, Smith's Beach by Hesperia. They're all trials of these new technologies. The Witchcliffe, as I said, the Peel Industrial Estate. And there are questions about who manages the microgrid. Can you aggregate them in some way? Is it a new business? Can local governments look after them the way they used to? So we've written a book called Greening the Greyfields, which is also a free book. These days you can do that. I've never done one with a publisher before like that, but Greening the Greyfields is written with Peter Newton, and it's how you regenerate the middle suburbs of low density cities. Here's an example of what we are talking about. This area here is near Garden City. All the people in there are old and wanting to upzone this area so they can build something better for their futures together. They want to do it as a precinct rather than subdividing each block. Now, the whole planning process doesn't easily deal with this. And this is the change, this is the transition we need to do. We need to put a line around the areas that we want to redevelop as precincts and do a much better job than what we've been doing with infill. And that is happening now because David Caddy has stepped in, but it's a difficult thing. The manuals are not there for how we should be doing this. So this book is all about that, and there's lots in there in Melbourne and Perth in particular. But we do have a history of doing net zero projects. There's a carbon neutral building there, or I forget what it's called now. And carbon neutral South Fremantle High School was the first high school in the world, probably, certainly in Australia. Vanessa Rowland, who did most of the work on that, now has a startup called Climate Clever. That's showing you how to do anything with your business or your home to make it more climate clever. So we have other good examples, and the new Dean of Sustainability Futures at Curtin is Josh Byrne. Professor Byrne built a house to demonstrate net zero, and it does work. You can see it all on his website, joshshouse.com.au. He has integrated solar, batteries and electric vehicles, and it's definitely net zero. Josh took these ideas and helped with the project that we ran through the CRC Low Carbon Living at White Gum Valley WGV, and Gemma Green did her PhD on how to share solar. And this is the first time that blockchain was discovered to be a very useful, smart way to enable people living in social housing in medium density areas throughout that site. And the Development WA project has proved to be very popular and is a demonstration of what a precinct can be like. And Power Ledger now works in 25 countries and has 85 staff doing this same work. So that's the kind of thing that's going to come out in our new economy future. Development WA have gone on now to make East Village, that's being built. It's a net zero precinct. It has a shared water bore as well as shared batteries with a blockchain-based management system and a microgrid. That's down in Fremantle on Knutsford Street. It has 80 to 120% less carbon with 20% less cost. The electric vehicle doesn't take much. The design is a big factor. The PVs are even bigger. Community battery helps there. And it's clearly cheaper, 20% less cost. So it's a lot better. We need to just make this an accelerated agenda, and it saves water and 50% less cost as well. We were involved in a project on my house with this small amount of solar I've got, doing a project called Renew Nexus, where we were trading, and it worked across 50 houses that were not connected geographically, physically, but through the grid. So it can work in the community. So across Perth now, we've got a globally significant experiment happening. The Distributed Energy Resources Roadmap, which was put together as a bipartisan parliamentary process by Jessica Shaw, has led to a process of accepting solar into our system, and we are now at 37%, probably over 40 already. It's the biggest power station and it's growing at 1 megawatt a day. So it's going to replace all the coal and gas it'll never be needed. So that transition is underway, and you can see it on the Western Power website. You can got these sort of maps showing where all the standalone power is, all the areas that are going to be standalone, and the areas that will have microgrids, that small towns as well as city areas. The standalone power is working really well out in the bush, and the microgrids in small towns like Kalbarri, and inside the city, got 11 site trials and the new Symphony project showing how to share solar within the grid. This is a massive experiment because we have to do it because of the growth in solar. This is a great project in the Peel Business Park. The Development WA have now putting industry into here that can have a lower price for power based on the fact that they're sharing solar. So electric vehicles are now happening across the world. Pretty slow here, but it's definitely accelerating, and it's a genuine issue to think about now. What happens? It's to be welcomed. Everything will go electric. All our cars, all our tractors, all our trucks, all our equipment in the house. But if the city is filled like that with electric vehicles, it's just the same as if they were diesel or petrol in terms of the space it occupies. That can be replaced with 3 buses or 1 light rail, 1 tram, even a trackless one. So we have to make choices about cars. We have to make choices about how distributed our power is. These are still coming. So how do we do this? The Net Zero Corridors project, which we've been running for some time in SBE, is about how you get these trackless trams down main roads, and you build around the stations, a bit like the Claremont TOD that's appeared in recent years, and you have lots of bikes and feed-in electric vehicles into each of the stations. The stations become a place of recharge, both for power, to the trackless trams and to each of the electric vehicles within that sector. And that's where the microgrid is. And this is the Tiller bike in Fremantle, which is a terrific local innovation. Now, this is what it's like in a trackless tram, and I just want to show you because the experience of it is what changed me from being a totally rail person to being something, saying that we could actually do something clever. Because this is like a train, but it's running on rubber wheels along and being censored along this track. So that's what it's like, because you don't have to grab your kids. It's very steady. It's it's going to be extremely popular. Now, we hope to get a trial this year. You can go to that SBE site and get that, not just that book, but free videos and papers as well that help fill that out. So how do we make this transition? If you can see that you have a string of net zero precincts along there, the microgrid that's built for that can then spread out into the surrounding areas, absorbing other houses into it until they merge into a giant patchwork of microgrids that are all part of the grid. That's how we can do it, but you've got to start somewhere, and the best way to do it is with urban regeneration built around a mid-tier transit. You can do last mile linkage with on-demand managed electric buses, and there's a number of precincts that will work this really well. So we end up with a city that's got a series of centres, a series of main road-based mid-tier transit that links across and around the city, and the centres become very important for local services. That's where your 10 to 15-minute city is, and you can live near something where many services are available. It starts, however, in the grey fields. In the middle suburbs is the best part to start. And that's what we've been doing. We've been looking at how the city of Stirling could have a trackless tram that would go through from Scarborough Beach to the city and go out the other side to Cannington, through Curtin, and maybe go down Beaufort Street as well, or out to UWA. And when we did the modelling, the Synopsis modelling on that, you could see there was enormous potential to make a significant improvement in the connection of the public transport system, which would enable much better urban regeneration outcomes. So our picture of the whole city is that we would have cross connections. There's a map on the left and then a kind of image of how you could do it, with the main Metronet going north-south mostly, and the lots of potential for metro hubs there, and then the mid-tier transit where you get a whole series of major sub-centres. All of that can be built as the major way of stopping urban sprawl. Brisbane are now moving that way. This is their new metro, as it's called. It's a bus, comes from Europe, but it is fully electric and a very much better quality ride. It doesn't have the same degree of autonomy that the one that we got to in China. But we need to trial all these things. We need to examine them all, as did Brisbane. Brisbane had to move quicker than the Chinese one, which wasn't quite ready. It's still not certified, which is what we need to do. But they have now sites all the way along both the metro line and particularly the Cross River Rail that's being built. It's their metro, if you like, getting ready for the Olympics. Lots of sites. They're taking this urban regeneration very seriously. Now, I just want to say something quickly, because Matt Canavan put this tweet out not so long ago saying that we've got a problem with all of this. There's not enough lithium, and it's very difficult to dig it out of the ground. And he said it takes a lot of brine to create it. Well, brine is in Chile, and that is not in Chile. That's actually a diamond mine in Canada, which shows how honest this whole thing was. And there's problems with the DRC and using child labour for cobalt. But the reality is we have all the battery minerals in Western Australia, and we are now producing more than half of the lithium that is needed, and is rapidly increasing. There are 8 new mines coming on, and they're all boutique mines. They're not the kind of thing like the huge mines in the north for the iron ore. So it is manageable, and we are also now processing this lithium. We are making lithium hydroxide in 3 processing plants, 2 in Kwinana, 1 at Kemerton. So we make very high quality lithium hydroxide, which goes straight to the battery producers. This is a new era that's emerging. We are actually going to be a major centre in the next economy for all these battery minerals and their process. The big mining companies are getting on with this net zero process. They're heading towards getting rid of diesel in all of their activities. And the remote settlements, Indigenous and mining, are all going solar and electric. So with hydrogen as well, which will be enabled to make green steel, there's a major factor that's going to increase the importance of regional port towns, because that's where a lot of the processing will occur. And we need to get ready for that, and to see that, and to welcome it, and to build only in a net zero way, because that's what all the companies are now beginning to do. It's accelerating. Finally, the net part of net zero is about the greening part. The green, it's about the land side of it, or carbon dioxide removal, which trees do best of all, and that needs to be done that under the net zero sign there. And it's done with saving forests, saving carbon. It's done with oil mallees in the landscape, in farming, and it's done with things like the Gondwana Links project, which is a fabulous project down in the southwest, and can do carbon offsets with biodiversity plantings, with Indigenous groups doing them. This is the kind of thing we need to show the world how to do, and even perhaps to think about how we can take the carbon sinks that we could make in our cities and use them as part of this whole process. So the final slide. There are 3 things happening that you can get involved in, anyone who wants to. Design Perth is happening. Brad Pettit's running this, and a number of people met last week to look at how to redo what was done, I don't know, it was 5 years ago, and this is now going to be called Net Zero Perth. So it's involving architects and engineers, builders, lots of organisations going to come up with a plan, and that will be really a civil society based exercise with assistance from government. The SBE is always looking for partners on our net zero corridors work. Plenty of work to do there that we can help on, and CRC Race is partnering on how to integrate power batteries, EVs and smart systems, if you want to get involved in that. So that's my perspective. I think we can have a good chat now about some issues.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Peter. Lots of interesting examples. It was great to see all of those. In fact, some of the participants have asked me whether we can share, we can have a kind of reading list of the name of the projects, etc.
Sure.
Yeah, so of course, we have recorded the presentation, the talk, and you can find the recordings on ArchiTalk.org website. And I don't know whether Peter would be able to share the slides or not. I can.
Oh, sure. I always give away my slides.
That would be great. Thank you. Perfect. Then anyone who is interested could possibly email me. I can share the slides with them. Thank you very much, Peter. Anyone has any question from the audience? Was that me? No.
Dominique here. Thanks, Peter. I wonder if you could stop sharing so that we can see you.
Yeah, I don't know quite how to do it there.
That's what. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So much there, so much potential. I actually didn't have a question. I was just wanting to see you as opposed to your desktop.
I'm here.
I think Arthur has written a message. Let's see if that's a question or not. That was great, Peter. Thank you for the presentation. I found it very useful, especially being new to this area. Okay, thanks, Arthur. Any question for Peter? Any other? I have one, please. I know that, well, you are a fan of urban density, but with the current Australian context, within this current Australian context, of course, with the urban sprawl and issues around it, we can't knock down, the whole city and build it up from scratch the way it should be. Do you think that the ultimate solution would be the green transport, trackless trams, electric ones, or we should have a different emphasis, in building urban areas, the new building, urban areas?
Yeah, density is something I have had to work on for a long time, and I think my first paper on that came out in 1978, which is before a lot of you were born, I dare say. But the issues there were pretty much the same as today. There's a whole lot of process issues and deep history. It was seen to be better for your health to not live in a dense situation, and most of that was nonsense. In historical terms, there's very little medical evidence for it. Hong Kong is one of the healthiest cities in the world. It has the longest lifetimes and lowest infant mortality rates and that sort of thing. And it was, ridiculously dense compared to Perth. But the English traditions were much more about that crowding is bad for your health, so why not just spread out? Unfortunately, what you lose is the urbanism that is necessary for work, for services, for public transport, for so many things. And increasingly, people have begun to see that. So in our book, the Greening the Greyfields book, there is a survey that was done in Melbourne to look at whether people wanted to go and live on the fringe or not, and what was their attitude to densities. And mostly people said, no, we don't want to live out there, but we don't like density much. But if we need to live in density, we really want to live in an inner city type location. So if you can provide an inner city type, that means they know they can't now get in the inner city. It's far too popular and incredibly expensive. So we're going to have to build inner cities throughout the suburbs, which is why we went that direction of saying it's where density can be built. No developer will be able to build high density on the urban fringe. It's just not going to sell. But if you can build it where there's already a lot of services, a lot of community, a lot of people want to stay there, that group of people out at in Applecross, they just wanted to stick around that area, and they were happy to take a smaller place in that area and to make some money out of that whole process. So they got together, and they're now working with planners to try and pull that off. So they themselves aren't worried. They're worried by the fact that their blocks are far too big to look after, and they want to redevelop, but not one at a time. So there's lots of opportunities that are coming now, and we need to make the most of them. And local governments very strongly now saying what they want is to develop these centres. Occasionally, one like the City of Melville will go through a bit of a reaction to something, and it only needs 3 people to run a campaign, and all of a sudden they go to water. But it's a major issue for planners to deal with.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you. Ella Rowlands. Ella, would you like to turn on your mic, or you're happy for me to read your question? I might read. How do we get the community on board with adopting, sure, no worries, with adopting a sustainable way of life, such as using public transport more? Perth people seem to be allergic.
Yeah, well, in 1979, when they closed the railway down, a lot of people told me, if you run a campaign to save the railways, you'll never win that. Perth is the car city. Buses are the best we'll ever get. Don't bother. Well, we did bother. We won that, and we've been winning ever since. Perth has moved from 7 million passengers a year on rail to 70 million passengers a year. And it's happened relatively quickly in a global context. Not many cities can say that. It's always slow to build all of that infrastructure. It certainly went backwards during the COVID time, and the roads are now full again, and at peak time it's very, very difficult to get around. And the trains are now filling again, the buses as well. And there are plans for a significantly more expansion of that system, and we're suggesting that the best way to enable it for people to enjoy is to be able to get to those train lines easily, and that's what the trackless tram will do. It'll run down corridors to those trains, and then you can get anywhere across in a fast way, comfortable way. It's a terrific service actually, and it's linked with buses, but it's much more chaotic with the bus. It needs to have a very clear route that goes along a major highway, and that's why we are working on this with Main Roads and Department of Transport, who are looking to see mid-tier at some point needs to be done, but I think it needs to accelerate now.
Thanks, Peter. Quite a few questions there. Sally Matthews, shall I read out your question? Maybe. Hi, Peter. Thank you for the great talk. I once read an article by you about people going to the gym to give energy. Is that still on the cards? I'm not quite sure if I understand that.
Yeah, look, we made a film about the resilience of Christchurch. It was called Christchurch Resilient City, similar to our Singapore one. And we went through all the different amazing creative things they were doing during the disaster when they had no power. For example, they made a dance floor that if you bounced up and down on it, it created power enough to play the music. That's the kind of thing that very creative people were doing there. No, I don't think it's got a great future, that one, but it was fun.
Yeah, dancing great, even better. Yeah. Andrew Howe. Hi, Andrew. Your question here, if the trackless tram is current technology, what's the roads block here in Perth?
Well, it is current technology, but like all technology, it has it has to go through a transition where all of the social, economic, policy, cultural issues that stop it from being absorbed have to be worked through. And the incumbents who are there already don't like to change. They're making money, or that's their job, as in government planners and so on. So that process needs to be worked through. And they're asking a lot of questions. And those questions can only be answered by having a trial here in Perth. So we're getting very close to bringing it out. Dean Economu and Marie Verscha working full-time virtually to get this out here, working with the City of Stirling on that. And it will happen. And we've got people in Sunshine Coast in Brisbane, we've got people in Sydney, and a large number of people in Melbourne gearing up to look very closely at our studies, our certification, and they will be ready to take it on as soon as we can do that. So it's important that we answer those questions, but it is a bit slow, and I really wonder sometimes if we aren't taking this climate thing seriously enough. And in government, there was a real wake-up call the Saturday before last. Last Saturday was a wake-up call to the football community, see that Fremantle's actually a real case. Well, there's a similar kind of story here. This is real. You've got to accelerate now what you're doing, and you cannot anymore hide, because every part of the political spectrum is now saying, get on with it. And this is part of that. Part of the trials on the trackless tram have to be facilitated.
Ross Donaldson. Ross, would you like to turn on your mic and camera, perhaps?
I'll see if, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Yep.
G'day, Ross.
Hey, Peter, how are you? Peter, just coming back to the political context and the Labor Party's declaration of 43% improvement by 2030. And let's say that between them and the independents and the Greens, we end up something more like 50%, which means that in the next 8 years, we've got to halve our current output. That's a heck of a challenge for the construction industry to play its part. I totally believe it can do that. You any thoughts about what would be the sort of the most important or the priority issues or actions to get to that 50% reduction in 8 years?
Well, I think the first thing would be to say to the approving authorities in local government and state government, who have to approve every development, that if something is net zero, it should be taken very seriously. Because at the moment that they are saying, well, oh dear, it's different. I'm not sure about this. But we need to take every risk possible to get some of these projects up, because they're all going to be demonstrating new things. There's no manual on it. There's no history of what's the right thing to do. And asking the government to take a risk is hard. But that's what we're now saying. We have to move quickly. And so that's the first thing I'd say. Secondly is that there needs to be a strategy worked out very quickly of where to facilitate and to put money into social housing that can demonstrate this, because that's a big issue anyway, and there's going to be money around for it. We need to make everything we build from now on into a net zero project. And you know the industry better than I do, and you've written about it and know what to do. So we've got to start really massive education campaigns to get every developer, every source of finance for the built environment fully behind this, because this is the future, and they're either going to leave behind a legacy of being too slow, because the projects that are underway now that are not net zero, they're going to be there in 50 years' time. And they're going to be looking at, and the developer's name will be mud. They say, what the heck did you do this for? when you've had solar and electric systems, you don't need gas. You can do everything without fossil fuels. So get on with it is the main message. But maybe you can tell me what you would do.
We should have coffee sometime.
Yeah.
Can we join too?
This is your show today.
Yeah, okay.
We have another question here. Mark Taylor. Thanks, Peter. Have cities elsewhere made the kind of a change we need without suffering a crisis first? I hope the answer is yes.
Look, it's not as much evident as you'd think. There's a lot going on national level, subnational level. Scotland, for example, is now 98 to 99% renewable. They closed all their coal-fired power stations down, and they, have a little bit of gas at one point, and that's the only thing left. But most of it was done with offshore wind power. The thing that's happening now in Europe is that they are discovering solar. They hadn't really had it before. They've got some solar out in farms, and they've got a lot of wind happening. They've got hydro, of course, but they're now discovering that solar is cheap and easy, and it actually works even in places like Norway, where they don't have much sun. So there was a show on The Naked Scientist on the Radio National about European solar, and they're discovering this distributed power like we've been doing on rooftops and making it available locally. So that process is now happening. But the places they're looking to are places like Perth, where we've gone a long way towards getting self-sufficient in renewable energy by people just putting more and more on the rooftops. 1 megawatt a day is going in. So we will be completely based on distributed power with a few little bits of other power around. As the electric vehicles come on, and the developers like Hesperia, Adrian Finney, and people like Mark Taylor doing it, are going to be putting in batteries, are going to be putting in electric vehicles and recharge systems. All of that's going to feed into a grid that will need balancing. And that experiment is what we're entering into now. And we can tell the world about it. I haven't yet got another city that is as far advanced as we are.
Thanks, Peter. We have this very interesting question from Genevieve. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Hi, Peter. I'm wondering what's your thoughts on the new COVID building grant that is only available for building separate homes on vacant blocks? Seems like a step in the wrong direction.
Well, there were quite a lot of steps in the wrong direction made in that last 6 months of the Liberal government, where they were essentially throwing money at them, a lot of their support base. They thought that the outer suburbs would be their main support base, and they also talked about the gas-based recovery, and involved people like Nev Power from the gas industry to write that for them. All of that was very misleading and really not helpful. So we do need federal involvement to help fund things, but when they target it, it mustn't be connected to lobby groups that have essentially the incumbents who don't want to change. They all got swept away, all of them. They now need to face up to the new world of net zero by 2030, roughly 50%. It's going to be a massive task, but everybody will need to do it. And they'll need to review all of those projects, all of those programs, where is the money going to? Is it going to help with that or hinder it? And what you said was actually it was causing urban sprawl, and that's not going to help.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Peter. I am conscious of time. I think if there's no other questions, I'm going to just thank everyone and Peter for your time. It was great presentation and discussion afterwards. Quite a few people have already emailed me if I can share the slides with them, and I can say yes on behalf of Peter. I'll definitely forward the slides as soon as I receive them from Peter. Yeah, thank you so much. Any finishing notes, Peter?
Well, I'm very happy to pursue anything with anyone on the call. We are always looking for people to help further in this, and it's we need everyone. So hopefully it is not just learning about it, but there's going to lead to some action from all of you. Thanks a lot.
No worries. Thank you. Lots of thank you messages for you, Peter, in the chat box.
Good.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.